Hey guys, tonight we trudge up a muddy, rutted road toward the looming silhouette of a medieval castle, just as the first shiver of pestilence whispers across the land. The stone walls stretch up into the misty morning sky, banners fluttering listlessly while guards pace atop the battlements, eyes wide for more than just the usual trouble. You pause at the heavy gatehouse, heart thumping, smelling the sharp tang of wood smoke and livestock. Somewhere beyond those ancient doors, 1,000 small dramas are about to unfold, each one shaped by the single, lurking threat that everyone dreads but no one can name aloud. It's not the kind of visit you'd wish for. You're cold, maybe a little hungry, and the sullen morning air holds that itchy, nervous energy that means something is about to go wrong. Inside, the castle's rhythms churn on as usual, the clang of the blacksmith, the low chatter of kitchen hands, the yawn of a page racing to his chores. But today, as you wipe the mud from your boots and squint up at the rising sun, you sense it. The entire place is wound tight as a drum. Word travels faster than a rat through the cellars. Someone, somewhere nearby, is ill with something no one quite understands. Of course, before you settle in, let's keep it real. You probably won't survive this. Medieval pestilence wasn't just a bad cold. It was an existential threat. The sort of thing that could empty villages, send lords fleeing to hunting lodges, and reduce the bravest knight to a bundle of talismans and prayers. Even if you make it through the gates, there's no promise you'll make it back out. But hey, history is nothing if not exciting, at least for us watching from the safety of a warm bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments below. I'm always curious where in the world and in history you're tuning in from.
Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you step beneath the heavy portcullis, your boots echo on cold flagstones, and you're met by a young page with a wary glance. You sense that news has travelled fast. Someone from the nearby village has fallen ill, and the whispers are already swirling. The guards murmur about a fever like the last one, while the steward quietly double-checks the list of incoming supplies. You find yourself pulled into the tide of daily life. Peasants unloading sacks of barley, a washerwoman scolding a giggling squire, the cook's dog weaving between legs with its nose to the ground. The castle itself is a living thing, part fortress, part home, part uneasy quarantine. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout Europe's Middle Ages, castles served not just as strongholds, but as centres of administration, and in times of pestilence, as refuges, and sometimes deadly traps. During outbreaks, castle gates could slam shut for weeks, cutting off the outside world in the name of safety. You're ushered into the main courtyard where you can taste the anxiety in the air. The livestock pens are quieter than usual. The stable boy's whistling has gone silent. The lady of the castle sweeps by in a flurry of velvet, offering a brittle smile as she orders fresh rushes for the hall. Fringed tidbit rushes were often scattered on floors, partly to hide dirt and partly in hopes that their scent would ward off sickness. You notice her glancing at her children, counting heads, her eyes darting nervously to the physician who lingers in the background with a bundle of dried herbs. As you make your way to the hall, you pass the ancient chapel, its doors propped open to let in the morning air, and perhaps whatever protection the saints might grant. Historians still argue whether these rituals airing out the chapel, burning incense, invoking local saints, had any real effect on pestilence, or whether they were just desperate gestures in the face of the unknown. Either way, everyone participates. No one wants to be the unlucky one who skips tradition and tempts fate. Inside, you're greeted by the scent of roasting onions and the distant clang of someone sharpening a blade. There's a sense of uneasy hopefulness. Maybe, just maybe, the castle will be spared. But beneath the routine, you feel the pressure mounting.
Servants exchange grim looks as they pass. The steward checks the stores with extra care, and even the dogs seem subdued. You find yourself swept along in the rituals of the day, warming your hands by the kitchen fire, listening to a grizzled archer mutter about bad air, and nodding politely as the herbalist hands you a sprig of sage just in case.
You just master everything you do and slip the herb into your pocket.
You're part of the castle now, whether you like it or not. And as the sun climbs higher, you realise that this is just the beginning.
The real test, and the real story, is about to unfold within these cold, echoing walls. A cold wind rattles the narrow arrow slits high above as you shuffle deeper into the castle's main hall, boots scuffing over flagstones polished by centuries of nervous feet. The atmosphere is charged with whispers and sideways glances. It's obvious that the pestilence has become the only thing anyone can talk about, though, ironically, no one dares to utter its name above a murmur. You find yourself guided, not by a confident host, but by the pulse of worry thrumming through every corridor and chamber. It begins, as always, with rumours. This morning a shepherd's boy was sent to the gate, cheeks flushed and voice shaking, to warn of a sickness spreading just 2 villages away. He claims his cousin took ill after the last market day, fever, chills, then silence. You overhear a group of guards at the gatehouse exchanging nervous bets. Would the pestilence hit the castle by week's end, or would they be spared this time? Each one has a different theory, a different horror story from a neighbouring estate, and more than one looks toward the drawbridge with something close to dread. The captain of the guard calls the first alarm a horn blast that echoes over the valley. He orders every stranger stopped, every cart searched, and posts a double watch on the postern gate. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval castles often functioned as both refuge and first line of defence when outbreaks struck nearby villages. Their guards, usually preoccupied with keeping out bandits or enemy soldiers, quickly became amateur gatekeepers against invisible enemies. Some castles even instituted elaborate screening rituals, forcing anyone entering to swear oaths of health or submit to a quick examination by the resident physician, who, let's be honest, was probably just as confused as everyone else. You notice the effect this has on daily life. Merchants, usually a welcome sight with their bales of cloth or barrels of salted fish, are now eyed with suspicion. The baker, who once delivered bread fresh every morning, is asked to leave his loaves at the outer gate and retreat before the portcullis is raised. The children, restless as pups, are suddenly kept indoors, forbidden from visiting the old orchard, where the castle's boundary meets the world beyond. The courtyard, usually alive with shouts and laughter, falls eerily silent, except for the heavy tread of guards making their rounds. Inside, the lord of the castle summons his council to the solar, a chamber thick with tapestries, as much to keep out the cold as to muffle the sound of anxious voices. The steward arrives first, clutching a battered ledger and muttering under his breath about dwindling stores and nervous villagers refusing to pay their rents. Next comes the priest, beads clicking in his hands as he suggests a week of special masses. Finally, the physician, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, proposes a regimen of burning aromatic herbs and keeping the castle's windows wide open to let out the miasma. Historians still argue whether medieval officials truly believed in bad air as the root cause of disease, or if it was just the best explanation they could offer given their limited understanding. Regardless, you'll soon learn that burning rosemary and waving lavender is about as effective as wishing on a falling star. But that doesn't stop anyone from trying. The council debates whether to close the castle entirely, barring entry to all outsiders, including, reluctantly, the miller's family who've served the household for generations. The mood is grim. The choice is cruel. Quarantine means security, but also isolation. Supplies may run low, tempers may fray, and the outside world becomes a distant rumour. But fear is a strong motivator, and by the end of the hour, the decision is made. The castle is to be locked down until further notice. You see how quickly the rules change The drawbridge is raised at dusk, only lowered in daylight, and only for those who can prove a desperate need. Newcomers are questioned, their names logged in a ledger that grows more ominous by the day. The youngest guards joke nervously about the invisible enemy, but even their laughter is brittle, edged with worry. Fringe tidbit: some castles, especially those with extra resources, would have a watcher's hut, or even a secondary outer gatehouse where visitors were required to wait several days before entry, a crude form of quarantine and a source of endless discomfort for guests and hosts alike. The servants tell stories of one unlucky minstrel who spent a whole week in the hut, playing sad songs to the crows before finally being allowed inside, only to find his audience too anxious to care. You join the rest of the castle folk in adjusting to the new regime. Meals are eaten in smaller, more scattered groups. The grand feasting hall, once filled with boisterous voices, is now subdued. Plates are passed with extra care, and no one lingers longer than necessary. The cook, who once boasted of her spice stews and honeyed cakes, now mutters about spoiled onions and suspicious mushrooms, her hands scrubbed raw from constant washing. There's a strange camaraderie in crisis, at least at first. You help repair a broken shutter in the servants' quarters, grateful for the distraction, and share a joke with the stable boy about using his horse's blanket as a new kind of plague mask. The laughter is genuine, if fleeting, and you sense everyone is holding their collective breath, waiting to see what tomorrow will bring. Still, as night falls and the torches are lit along the ramparts, a sense of dread creeps in. The castle has become both sanctuary and prison, its walls keeping out danger, but also sealing in fear. You climb to your chamber beneath the eaves, listening to the muffled sounds below, the distant barking of a dog, the shuffle of guards on patrol, and just barely, the whispered prayers of those hoping for another sunrise without sickness. Historians still debate whether these first frantic measures actually made a difference. Some argue that swift lockdowns saved lives. Others point out that castles, with their crowded halls and communal living, could easily become death traps once the pestilence found its way in. For now, all you can do is follow the new rules, share what comfort you can, and hope that the worst remains only a rumour beyond the castle gates. You're jolted awake before dawn by the clang of the castle bell, an insistent, metallic sound that rings off every stone and stirs a low panic in the marrow of your bones. You grope for your boots in the darkness, wondering if this is an ordinary drill, or if the pestilence has finally arrived at the very threshold. Outside your chamber, shadows flicker as torches bob along the gallery. The air in the passage is thick, heavy with the mingled scents of tallow, wool, and fear. You join the huddle of sleepy, anxious faces streaming toward the great hall, feeling the tension like a drawn bowstring. Down in the courtyard, the mood is changed entirely. The gates are shut tight, the portcullis lowered and bolted with a final, echoing crash. A pair of guards, usually half bored and distracted, now stand rigid, spears crossed, and faces set in a mask of grim determination. The master-at-arms paces like a caged wolf, barking orders at the grooms and squires to keep the livestock penned and the dogs quiet. Every entrance and exit is manned. The air tastes of metal and anxiety. You barely have time to catch your breath before the steward calls a roll of every soul inside the walls. One by one, names are read off: knights, cooks, maids, pages, blacksmiths, and even the itinerant peddler who slipped in the night before. The castle's population, suddenly finite, feels smaller than ever. You scan the crowd for familiar faces, seeing more worry than hope.
Mainstream historical fact. In times of pestilence, many medieval castles locked their gates completely, allowing no one in or out for weeks.
Sometimes even family members or trusted servants, arriving late, would be forced to beg for mercy outside the walls, watched with suspicion from atop the battlements. The process is clinical, cold, and necessary. The lady of the castle, usually a vision of dignity, stands beside her husband, her fingers knotted in silent prayer, as she surveys the gathering. You hear a low moan as a child is counted, then recounted, after sneaking off to chase the cats. In the rush, no one wants to risk missing a single person. After all, anyone left out could mean an unguarded door, a gap through which pestilence might slip. With the census complete, the Lord's Council gathers in the chapel to bless the quarantine. You're drawn along by the flow of bodies, hands fumbling with rosaries and charms, as the priest invokes every saint he can name. Candles gutter and smoke in the cold air, their scent mixing with the pungent tang of rosemary and juniper that servants burn in the aisles. Fringe tidbit: in many castles, burning strong-smelling herbs and incense was thought to cleanse the air of disease. Someone starts a nervous joke about whether all the saints are listening, or just the mice beneath the pews. It gets a few tired chuckles. By midday, the new rules are already in effect. The gates will remain sealed. All trade and travel is suspended until the threat passes. A phrase so vague, you realize it could mean days, weeks, months. The steward posts rotating watches at every entrance, and messengers are forbidden from crossing the bridge unless summoned by the Lord himself. Those with family outside exchange anxious glances, knowing that from now on even news will come at a trickle. You watch as routines shift overnight. Servants who once bustled in and out are now confined, pacing restlessly as they adjust to life in an ever-shrinking world. The kitchens start to ration the freshest foods, turning instead to stores of salted meat, dried peas, and the ever-present flatbread that tastes faintly of yesterday's smoke. The baker sets aside an extra loaf just in case. You're not sure if he means for a guest, or for the desperate bargaining that sometimes follows disaster. Children, denied their usual freedom, invent new games in cramped corners, racing spinning tops across flagstones, turning chamber pots into drums, and staging dramatic retellings of the last village festival. The castle dogs grow restless, barking at every shadow, and even the chickens seem agitated, clucking more than usual, as if they sense something unnatural in the air. Historians still argue whether such strict quarantines were effective, or if they simply delayed the inevitable. Some records tell of castles that remained untouched for months, only to succumb in the final days when caution slipped. Others became accidental sanctuaries, their inhabitants emerging pale and thin, but alive, long after the countryside had been emptied by the plague. Evening brings a strange kind of calm. With the world outside walled off, you find yourself noticing small comforts. A soft rush mat beneath your feet, the golden light pooling in the chapel, the quiet solidarity of those trapped together. There is a feeling that survival now depends less on strength of arms, and more on patience, luck, and the grace of the unseen. You settle into your makeshift bunk, listening as the castle quiets for the night. Somewhere nearby, a nursemaid hums a lullaby, and you catch the tail end of a prayer for distant loved ones. You wonder what's happening beyond the walls, if the world will be the same when the gates open again, or if by then you'll have grown so used to this fortress life that you'll scarcely remember the world before the pestilence. As you drift to sleep, you realize the castle is both sanctuary and cage, a place where hope, fear, and habit are all that stands between you and the waiting darkness. And with that thought, you tuck the blanket tighter, determined to see another sunrise, come what may. You awake to the muffled sound of the court physician pacing restlessly outside the Lord's Solar, his heavy leather bag thumping against his hip. Word spreads quickly through the cramped stone corridors. The castle's medical expert is about to pronounce his plan for keeping pestilence at bay. If you were hoping for a day of rest, forget it. This morning is going to be a crash course in medieval medicine. Equal parts faith, guesswork, and wishful thinking. In the great hall, A crowd has gathered. You squeeze between a pair of squires to get a better look at the physician. A gaunt figure in a patched robe, his belt clinking with tiny vials and tools.
Mainstream historical fact. Medieval physicians, when available, were often university trained, but their understanding of disease was a patchwork of Greek theory, local superstition, and church doctrine.
The castle's doctor unfurls a scroll covered in crabbed Latin and begins with a gravitas worthy of a royal proclamation to announce his remedies. The list is both impressive and alarming. First come the leeches, those ever-reliable little creatures believed to balance the humours. Several squires blanch at the thought, eyeing their own veins nervously. Next, the physician prescribes a regimen of onion poultices, thin slices layered on the chest to draw out evil vapours. He recommends baths in wine for those who can afford it, and for everyone else, daily rinses with vinegar, which are said to close the pores against foul airs. He even suggests a concoction of rosewater, mint and, wait for it, ground up emeralds, though it's quietly acknowledged that the Lord probably won't be grinding his signet ring anytime soon. The priest, not to be outdone, stands to remind everyone that prayer is as important as any medicine. A special candle is to be burned in the chapel day and night, while each household must recite the paternoster thrice before breakfast. Someone jokes that even the saints are probably growing weary of all the new requests, drawing a few strained laughs. A flurry of questions follows. Is it true, a kitchen maid asks, that garlic on the windowsill will keep the pestilence out? The physician shrugs. It can't hurt. Another servant wants to know if the rumour about bathing being dangerous is real. Here the physician grows animated, explaining that too much bathing could open the body's pores, letting in the bad air. Historians still argue whether the widespread medieval suspicion of bathing helped or hindered survival during outbreaks. Some suggest it prevented disease spread by discouraging communal baths. Others point out it likely made things worse by encouraging filth. The mood in the hall swings between fear and grim amusement as more remedies are announced. A few are practical, burning juniper in sick rooms, cleaning rushes from the floor, and keeping windows open to air out the stench, but many are downright odd fringe tidbit. In some regions, people hung dead toads in rooms, or wore amulets filled with dried herbs and even bits of snakeskin, hoping to trick or repel the unseen enemy. With the council dismissed, everyone scurries off to implement the new protocols. You watch as the ladies' maids line the windowsills with wild garlic, and the steward orders barrels of vinegar brought up from the cellars. The blacksmith, never one to miss an opportunity for mischief, dips his hands in a tub of wine, then declares himself cured, and asks for another. The tension breaks for a moment, laughter echoing off the high rafters. But the physician isn't finished. He posts a rota. Anyone feeling ill must report at once, and the sick are to be isolated in the old storage chamber beside the kitchens. Here, a makeshift infirmary takes shape. Mattresses stuffed with straw are dragged in, the air thickened with the scent of rosemary and vinegar. Each new patient is examined with great ceremony, and the physician marks symptoms in a ledger. Sweats, chills, coughing, mysterious spots. No one says it aloud, but the question lingers in every eye. Will these treatments actually help? Or is it all just theatre to calm frayed nerves? As the day wears on, you notice the subtle impact these routines have on morale. The herbalist, a no-nonsense woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of weeds, sets up shop outside the infirmary. She offers her own take teas of elderflower and yarrow, nettle soups, and for the truly desperate, a foul-tasting syrup rumoured to scare the pestilence clean out of a body. Servants sneak her small gifts, a coin, a comb, a slice of bread in exchange for their favourite remedy. You find yourself sipping nettle tea and wondering if placebo is the most powerful medicine of all. Historians still debate the efficacy of medieval treatments. Some modern scholars argue that even the oddest remedies provided comfort and a sense of agency, helping people endure what they couldn't cure. Others insist that most cures were harmless at best and dangerous at worst. But tonight, as the castle settles under the hush of another uneasy evening, you're grateful for any sense of hope, even if it comes in the form of leeches, prayers, and a pocket full of garlic cloves. As the grey dawn light creeps across the castle yard, you find yourself drawn to the kitchen, a bustling heart that beats faster now, thrumming with anxiety and the pungent aroma of too many onions. The usual cheerful chaos is gone, replaced by a tense vigilance as cooks, scullions, and kitchen boys gather around the head cook's battered chopping block. Today, every conversation circles back to one thing: how to stretch dwindling supplies and keep the pestilence out of the pantry. The door is barred to outsiders, and only a handful of trusted servants are allowed in or out. The cook, a broad-shouldered woman with a scarred forearm and a glare that could curdle milk, is deep in council with her two most senior helpers. Mainstream historical fact: food safety during medieval outbreaks was a desperate balancing act. Castles relied on storerooms, stocked with salted meat, dried beans, and old cheese. The weekly arrival of fresh produce or eggs from local farms, a lifeline in ordinary times, now represents an unacceptable risk, so the castle must rely on what's already inside the walls. You watch the tense inventory unfolds. The flour chest is only half full. The last apples have gone soft, and the cheese smells suspicious, even to the dog. Barrels of salted herring are rolled from the cellar with a reverence usually reserved for relics. Every sack of beans and root vegetables is checked and rechecked. The cook orders her helpers to sort through the grain, tossing anything with the faintest hint of mould. "Better hungry than fevered," she declared. A squire jokes about missing fresh bread, and is quickly shushed. No one wants to tempt fate. Fringe tidbit: some medieval kitchens hung bunches of sage, bay, or rosemary from the rafters, believing the scent would keep sickness away and perhaps bless the food as it cooked. Today the kitchen's rafters are heavy with drying herbs, giving the air a medicinal sharpness that makes your nose itch and your eyes water. The real tension, though, centers around rumors of contaminated bread. One of the kitchen boys, red-faced and wide-eyed, insists he's heard that sickly flour can bring the pestilence. The head cook snorts, but sets a pot of water to boil anyway, ordering everyone to wash their hands and faces before coming near the food. The bread oven, usually the warmest, friendliest spot in the castle, now feels like a place of judgment. Every loaf is sliced, sniffed, and scrutinized before being passed to the tables. You help shell beans at a corner table, listening to the latest debates over which herbs are safest. One servant swears by thyme, another by mint, a third by a complicated brew involving wormwood and a splash of last year's cider. There's a joke that whoever eats the most onions will scare away not just the pestilence, but all potential suitors for the next 5 years. The laughter is genuine, but the worry beneath it is real. The castle's menus shrink to fit the new reality. Breakfast is thin porridge with a hint of salted meat. Supper is a stew bulked out with beans and whatever roots remain. On feast days, if anyone remembers them, there's maybe a handful of dried plums or a little cheese for the Lord's table, with scraps trickling down to the rest. The cooks whisper about how long the stores will last and whether the next delivery from the outer villages will come before they have to start rationing even the vinegar. Historians still argue whether these strict food measures made a difference. Some believe that controlling the food supply did slow the spread of disease, at least for a time. Others claim that, as hunger set in, malnutrition weakened resistance to the pestilence. What's certain is that every day of lockdown puts more strain on the larders and the people. It's not just food that's in short supply, so is trust. You watch the cook scrutinize a newly delivered sack of oats questioning the messenger about his family's health, what route he took, whether he saw anyone coughing along the road. Even the chickens are eyed suspiciously. A rumour spreads that the last hen to stop laying eggs had the look of a sick beast.
No one laughs at that.
Amid this gloom, a little ingenuity emerges. The herbalist brings jars of pickled garlic and honeyed sage to bolster the menu. Children are sent to hunt for wild sorrel in the weed-choked garden beds. The kitchen scullions try their hand at making dried apple slices taste new again by tossing them with mint and vinegar. A recipe that, depending on who you ask, is either inspired or a last resort. One evening, the head cook hosts a contest for the strangest edible thing in the pantry. The winner is a wrinkled turnip carved into the shape of a toad, which somehow becomes the kitchen's new mascot. You linger late, helping wash the last pots, enjoying the rare camaraderie that emerges at the edge of desperation.
Someone dares a song, and for a few minutes laughter returns. You realize that for all the dread and deprivation, the kitchen remains the heart of the castle, a place where hope is measured out, one spoonful at a time, and where even the thinnest broth can taste like survival.
As you leave, the cook presses a clove-studded orange into your hand, for luck, her gruff voice soft for once. You slip it into your pocket, knowing that in the days ahead, a little extra luck might be the most precious thing of all. As a weak sun rises over the battlements, casting long shadows across the frost-stiff grass, the castle's daily routine now pivots around a single pressing question: is the water safe? The great stone well in the centre of the courtyard, usually a place for cheerful gossip and splashing buckets, has become an object of worry and constant scrutiny. Every cup, every ladle, every wooden cask is eyed with the suspicion usually reserved for a visiting tax collector. You join a small crowd huddled near the well, drawn by the tense debate between the steward and the castle's old well-keeper, a man whose beard looks like it's been steeped in iron and whose authority is never questioned, at least not openly. The steward insists that all water must be boiled before drinking. The well-keeper, however, scoffs at the notion, pointing out that this water's been keeping us alive since my grandfather's day. Still, the steward prevails. Today, every kettle in the kitchens will be bubbling from dawn until nightfall, and the kitchen boys will be hauling water like pack mules.
Mainstream historical fact. Medieval people had only a limited understanding of how disease spread, but contaminated water was often blamed for outbreaks, especially when wells lay near refuse pits or stables. Castles with more advanced plumbing, wooden pipes, lead cisterns or rainwater collection systems were considered lucky, though not always safer.
You notice the castle's other water sources are treated with almost superstitious care. Rain barrels are kept under lock and key, their contents reserved for special uses: washing, laundry, sometimes even cooking if the main well is off. The herbalist, called in for her second opinion, recommends tossing a handful of sage or a pinch of salt into every barrel. A clean well is a happy well, she declares, drawing a reluctant laugh from the crowd. But anxiety lingers. A rumour has started that a neighbouring village's well turned foul just before the pestilence struck. Some blame it on a dead animal, others on witches. One of the stable hands swears he saw a cat slip down into the shadows by the rain barrel last night. Now the barrel is roped off and watched like a treasure chest. Fringe tidbit: in some parts of Europe, it was considered wise to tie a red ribbon to the well's bucket to ward off sickness. Today the castle's buckets sport a confused tangle of ribbons, wool, and even a silver button for extra luck. You help the kitchen staff fill their pots, the routine now painstaking. Every vessel is checked for cracks, and any hint of cloudiness is met with immediate disposal. Water is doled out carefully, and even hand-washing becomes a ritual. Scrub, rinse, bless, repeat. When the cook declares that soup will be made only with blessed water today, no one objects. You can see in the tightness of her smile that she's just as worried as everyone else. With every passing hour, the paranoia grows. A guest at dinner coughs. And suddenly, no one wants the gravy. A squire claims his tea tastes off, sending the herbalist running for her copper kettle. The priest, never one to miss a sermon opportunity, delivers a rousing lecture on purity and vigilance at the evening meal, ending with a prayer for the castle's water to remain as clear as the souls of its inhabitants. You suspect the saints have their work cut out for them. Historians still argue whether these water rituals were born of practical observation or simple desperation. Some records suggest that castles with strict water management did fare better during outbreaks. Others point out that luck, more than any ritual, was the real line between safety and disaster. Yet, amid the worry, you see the castle adapting in clever ways. Rainwater is funneled from the roof into special barrels for cleaning and drinking. The children are sent out in supervised groups to gather dew in linen cloths, a slow, tedious process that yields little but keeps them busy and out of trouble. The kitchen staff even experiments with new drinks, mulled wine, cider, and if you're truly desperate, a faintly sour water beer that's safer than the well and much better than nothing. Fringe tidbit: some castles believed that tossing silver coins or blessed stones into the well would purify it. Today you find a small pile of coins, beads, and even a wooden cross sitting by the well, an ever-growing collection of hopes and fears. As night falls, the steward orders a final inspection. Torches flicker as he circles the well, checking the rope, the bucket, the stone rim for cracks. The well-keeper mutters about city folk and their worries, but you catch him double-checking the lid just the same. The castle's entire routine now hinges on the simple act of drawing water and the uneasy knowledge that if the well goes bad, there's nowhere left to run. Historians still debate, was all this effort worthwhile, or just a distraction from a threat no one truly understood? You wonder too as you lie in bed, listening to the distant clang of the last bucket and the soft, uncertain prayers for another day of clean water and clear skies. The sharp, unmistakable tang of something rotten wakes you before sunrise. You wrinkle your nose as you pull on your boots, realizing that the castle air, usually rich with the smell of bread, smoke and livestock, has grown thick with a new, unmistakable stench. As you descend to the lower levels, you discover you're not alone. Servants and squires cluster near the main stairwell, eyes watering, hands covering faces, everyone grumbling about the devil's own perfume drifting through the halls. The culprit isn't hard to find. The castle's main privy, tucked behind a heavy oak door and accessible by a winding passage, is overflowing again, a casualty of too many people crammed inside the walls, and not enough space for all that's being left behind. You join the procession of unlucky souls chosen to help the gong farmer. Yes, that's the real medieval title. Haul buckets, mop the stone, and sprinkle the floors with freshly cut rushes and armfuls of rosemary. Mainstream historical fact: castles depended on a network of garderobes and cesspits, with waste usually dumped into a moat or pit below. In times of lockdown, these primitive systems were quickly overwhelmed, turning the entire lower castle into a source of misery. Everyone has an opinion about how to beat the stink, and more importantly, how to ward off the disease they believe is carried by bad air. One of the kitchen maids swears by bundles of lavender hung above every doorway. A squire, in a fit of wild optimism, suggests they try burning lemon peels, but the cook laughs, noting that lemons are rarer than rubies here. You watch as the herbalist distributes nosegays, small bundles of thyme, sage, and wormwood meant to be tucked under collars and inside sleeves, the medieval equivalent of a scented mask. You can't help but notice that the Lord himself now carries a pomander, a tiny silver ball filled with clove-studded orange and dried flowers, swinging from his belt like a knightly badge of honour. Fringe tidbit: some castles went even further, rolling out barrels of vinegar or burning piles of juniper and pine cones in the corridors. You watch as the smoke drifts lazily under doors, leaving a sticky residue on the windows and an odd, sharp smell that sticks to your clothes. For a brief moment, the stench subsides, replaced by the illusion of safety and cleanliness. The castle's battle with filth becomes a kind of daily ritual. Servants rise early to sweep rushes, scatter petals, and scrub down benches. The kitchen set aside a pot for boiling rags in vinegar used to wipe down door handles and wash hands. Every chamber is aired at least once a day, with windows and shutters flung wide, despite the autumn chill. You shiver as a cold draught sneaks down the corridor, but are grateful for even a whiff of fresh air. Still, for all the effort, the stench persists. Historians still argue whether these measures actually prevented illness or were merely acts of desperation. Some suggest that, while not perfect, frequent cleaning and aromatic herbs did help keep down disease spread in tight quarters. Others point out that nothing short of modern plumbing could really conquer a castle's collective waste, and that the strongest noses and stomachs were often the healthiest survivors. Humour, as always, becomes a defence mechanism. The castle jester crafts a song about the valiant nose warriors, performing it at supper to gales of laughter and a few exaggerated gagging noises. The children join in, marching around with bundles of lavender, as herb knights, poking fun at anyone who dares complain about the smell. Even the lord, red-faced from effort and embarrassment, manages a laugh when someone dares suggest a new coat of arms, a chamber pot on a field of green. By day's end, the air in the castle feels a bit lighter, not necessarily cleaner, but touched by the sense of a shared struggle. You help the herbalist hang one last bundle of rosemary by the great hall, breathing in its sharp, slightly medicinal scent. You realize that in the midst of fear and filth, these small rituals are more than practical, they're gestures of hope. The way to claim victory, however temporary, over forces that feel overwhelming. That night, as you settle onto your straw mattress, the stink has faded to a faint memory, overtaken by laughter and the lingering smell of pine. You wonder whether future generations will remember your castle's fight with filth as heroic or hilarious, or maybe just necessary. For now, you're grateful for a noseful of rosemary, a warm blanket, and the knowledge that tomorrow, at least, you'll face the stink together. You wake to find the castle suddenly smaller, the corridors more crowded, the air thick with the restless energy of people pressed too close together. Word has gone out, certain rooms have been sealed off, doors barred, shutters nailed shut, and guards stationed at stairwells no one had bothered with since last winter. What was once a sprawling stronghold now feels like a labyrinth. Each hallway a potential dead end, each chamber a possible trap. The pestilence, it seems, has forced everyone into a defensive crouch, and you're right in the middle of it. As you make your way through the main keep, you notice the changes everywhere. The door to the west tower is blocked by a row of overturned tables. The solar, usually filled with music and sunlight, is silent, its tapestries draped over the windows, its doors bolted from the outside. The castle's small chapel is now a makeshift sick room, its pews pushed aside to make room for straw mattresses and bowls of bitter-smelling broth. Mainstream historical fact: medieval castles sometimes use drastic isolation measures, sealing off entire wings or outbuildings at the first sign of illness, hoping to contain outbreaks before they could sweep through the household. The atmosphere grows tense. Some servants whisper that the Lord's eldest son is showing signs of fever, though no one dares say so, near the lady of the house, who spends her days pacing the halls, clutching a rosary so tightly her knuckles turn white. Children are kept strictly to their rooms. The nursery becomes a fortress of blankets and prayer beads. Even the dogs scent something's amiss, slinking away from unfamiliar corners, barking at doors that never used to be closed. You find yourself assigned to a new post, the kitchen's back passage, now one of the few ways to reach the kitchens without passing through the sealed-off main hall. It's dark and cramped, filled with the musty smell of old potatoes and dried herbs. Every trip you make is shadowed by fear. One wrong turn, one open door, and you might stumble into a room that's been quarantined, or worse, into the hands of the physician on his endless rounds. Fringe tidbit. Some castles resorted to painting marks on doors, red crosses, black circles, or even cryptic sigils to warn of danger within. You spot such a mark on the buttery, its meaning fiercely debated by the kitchen staff. Was it a sign of illness, a warning to stay away, or just the work of a bored page with too much chalk? No one seems eager to find out. The isolation begins to take its toll. The castle's musicians, once scattered throughout the halls, now play quietly in the main courtyard, hoping their music will drift through open windows and lift spirits. The Lord's Council meets in hushed tones at odd hours, always glancing over their shoulders, always quick to end the meeting at the slightest cough. Meals are delivered to rooms by masked servants, cloths tied tightly over mouths and noses, eyes wary above the makeshift veils. Historians still argue whether these containment efforts were more help or harm. Some credit strict isolation for saving lives, breaking the chain of infection in households that could afford to close off entire wings. Others note that close quarters, shared air, and the psychological weight of confinement often bred suspicion, resentment, and a different kind of sickness altogether. Tensions flare as boredom and fear collide. Siblings bicker, servants snap at each other over minor chores, and even the lord and lady have been heard arguing behind closed doors. You catch a kitchen maid crying quietly in a corner, homesick for her family on the outside, terrified she'll never see them again. You offer a clumsy word of comfort and share your last bit of honey cake, which wins a watery smile and, for a moment, a break in the gloom. Despite it all, small acts of kindness shine through. Someone organizes a game of riddles for the children, their laughter echoing down the stairwells. An elderly knight offers lessons in chess, promising a boiled egg to anyone who can beat him. No one has yet. The herbalist starts a secret garden in the old storeroom, filling pots with sprigs of mint and thyme, insisting that green things will keep the pestilence at bay, and if nothing else, make the air less heavy. By nightfall, the castle feels both safer and lonelier. You listen to the muffled sound of prayers in the sick room, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, and the low hum of a lullaby from the nursery. The walls feel closer, but so do the people within them, united, if only by fear and the stubborn hope that tomorrow will bring better news. You settled into your makeshift bed in the corner of the scullery, grateful for the warmth of a borrowed cloak, and the nearness of others who understand exactly what you're feeling. The castle may be shrinking, but your circle of comfort grows just a little stronger, one small kindness at a time. You wake to the distant, echoing chant of a priest weaving his way through the halls, swinging a brass censer that trails clouds of sharp, biting incense behind him. The castle is thick with rituals today. In times of pestilence, even the most cynical knights bow their heads a little lower, and servants who rarely darken the chapel's door now line up for a hasty blessing. If it might help, it's worth trying, no matter how strange or uncomfortable it seems. You are sent to fetch fresh rushes for the main hall, only to discover a strange assembly in progress. The priest, draped in a cloak heavy with gold thread, stands at the centre, chanting Latin invocations as he moves from one corner of the room to the next. The air is thick with the smell of frankincense, rosemary, and something that might be myrrh. He pauses to sprinkle holy water on the tapestries and mutter a blessing over the hearth. Mainstream historical fact: priests and monks were often called upon to perform purification rituals, sprinkling holy water, burning incense, or holding processions through the corridors. Some households even staged elaborate exorcisms to drive away the evil vapours believed to carry disease. The castle's lady follows close behind, clutching a reliquary said to contain the finger bone of a local saint. She presses it to every doorframe, leaving a faint mark of oil behind. Fringed tidbit, anointing doorways with oil, wine, or even garlic was a common folk custom, believed to create a barrier against sick. You watch as she presses the relic into your palm, eyes wide and earnest, urging you to carry it with you for the rest of the day. For protection, you nod solemnly and tuck it away, feeling a little safer, or at least a little less alone. The rituals extend beyond the Great Hall. In the kitchen, cooks toss handfuls of sage, thyme, and bay leaves onto the hearth, their smoke mingling with the aroma of stew. The herbalist leads a small procession around the castle's outer walls, chanting prayers and waving branches of juniper. At every corner, a stop is made for a special incantation, sometimes whispered, sometimes sung at the top of her lungs, if she thinks no one is listening. The children, at first skeptical, soon join in. There's something oddly reassuring about the repetitive, almost musical pattern of the words. You notice that the more anxious the castle becomes, the stranger the rituals get. The Lord orders every shoe in the household placed in a circle at the base of the stairwell. No one is quite sure why, but no one dares question it. A nervous squire suggests they hang sprigs of nettle from every window to ward off the pox. The priest allows it, and the window ledges soon bristle with greenery. Even the stable master gets involved, leading the horses through a cloud of incense and tying strips of red cloth to their manes for luck. Historians still argue whether these purification rites helped, or simply gave people a sense of control in a chaotic world. Some records suggest that communities that came together for shared rituals survived with higher morale, even if the disease itself was never truly stopped. Others see these efforts as mostly symbolic, a way to do something when there was little else available. You find comfort in the routine, the repetition of prayers, the rhythmic swinging of the censer, and the soft hum of chant are strangely soothing. There's even a kind of camaraderie in the oddity. When the cook's dog chases after the priest's swinging robes and upsets a pail of holy water, the entire hall bursts into laughter, tension dissolving for a brief, blessed moment. The day ends with a formal procession around the castle walls. Every soul lord, lady, servant, child, and beast joins in, moving solemnly under the watchful eyes of saints carved above the main gate. The priest chants a final blessing, the reliquary is lifted high, and the castle seems for a moment to breathe easier. The routines have not banished the threat, but they've given everyone a sense of purpose, a thread of hope and unity in the midst of fear. That night, as you drift into sleep, the faint scent of rosemary lingers in the air, and the last echoes of the priest's chant seem to weave themselves into your dreams. Whether the pestilence will heed these rituals or not, you know you'll wake tomorrow a little less afraid, surrounded by people who, like you, will try anything to keep hope alive. Morning drags itself into the castle on a sour, restless wind. The priest's chants and herbal rituals from yesterday have faded, but you sense the mood has not improved. If anything, it's taken a turn for the stranger. Whispers fill every corner, and suspicion stalks the corridors as stealthily as any shadow at dusk. For in the tight quarters of a locked-down castle, fear is fertile ground, and soon superstition begins to blossom. You're greeted in the kitchen by a pair of maids, arguing over whether the pestilence was brought by a witch who lives in the woods, or if it's punishment for the steward's failure to give alms to passing beggars. The castle's blacksmith, a superstitious sort, insists the pox is caused by unlucky winds blowing in from the north. He spends half the morning nailing an old horseshoe above the gate for luck, while the other half is spent muttering about dreams of black dogs and owls, both considered harbingers of disaster. But the most outlandish theory comes from an elderly nursemaid who claims she saw a ghostly figure wandering the battlements by moonlight, trailing a shadow that smelled of fever and graveyards. Some servants snicker, but others make the sign of the cross, or clutch their protective amulets a little tighter. Mainstream historical fact: superstition ran rampant in times of plague. Medieval people blamed everything from eclipses and comets to wandering spirits, foreigners, even certain foods or unlucky colours, for outbreaks they could not explain. The tension thickens when a kitchen boy finds a small, crudely made doll stuffed with straw beneath a bench in the buttery. Rumours spread like wildfire. Some claim it's a witch's curse, others that it's merely a child's forgotten toy. The head cook, no fan of such drama, tosses it in the hearth with a warning glare, but the damage is done. By lunch, half the castle believes they're the target of dark magic. The priest attempts to stamp out the growing panic, leading another round of prayers in the courtyard and urging everyone to trust in faith, not fear. Still, you notice even he is wearing an extra relic around his neck, a sliver of bone said to belong to a holy hermit who cured hundreds with a single glance. You spot similar charms sprouting everywhere. Knots of red thread tied around wrists, bits of yew branch above doors, dried wolfsbane hung on the Lord's great chair. The herbalist quietly brews a batch of mugwort tea for nightmares, doling it out to anyone who wakes in a cold sweat. Meanwhile, blame begins to swirl. The castle's young scullion, known for his wild imagination, is accused of bringing bad luck after sneaking into the stables and whispering curses at the chickens. A visiting peddler, unlucky enough to be the last person through the gates before quarantine, is watched with open suspicion. He's forbidden from mingling with others, and spends his days in a draughty storeroom, under the watchful eye of a guard who spits over his left shoulder whenever he walks past. You notice how quickly suspicion turns to exclusion, and how fast isolation breeds the seeds of new scapegoats. Fringe tidbit: in some castles, those believed to have magical powers, herbalists, wise women, and midwives, became both invaluable and intensely distrusted. If the pestilence worsened, their medicines might be praised. If it spread, they could become targets. In one legendary tale, a midwife saved half a household with her remedies, only to be accused of witchcraft when a lord's favourite hound died. You hear a similar story whispered among the maids, who warn each other not to be too clever by half, or draw too much attention from the wrong quarters.
Historians still argue whether these outbursts of fear and superstition made things worse, or if they were simply a coping mechanism for powerless people trapped in an inexplicable crisis. Some accounts suggest that witch hunts did flare up during outbreaks, leading to tragic consequences, while other records show that communities often rallied around their outcasts, drawing lines between helpful healers and imagined villains.
You find yourself caught in the swirl of it all, trying to keep your head down as rumours multiply. A knight claims to have seen lights in the woods. The laundry mistress suspects the new girl of bringing the fever, and the castle's dogs refuse to enter the North Tower because they can smell death. Children are forbidden from telling ghost stories, but the rules only make the tales more popular. At night you hear them giggling and shrieking as they try to outdo each other with increasingly wild accounts of haunted wells and spectral ladies. The castle's routines, once a bulwark against chaos, now become infused with superstition. Meals are started with prayers, ended with toasts to ward off ill winds. Anyone who sneezes is blessed, sometimes with genuine concern, sometimes with nervous laughter. Even the blacksmith, usually a pillar of sense, refuses to shoe any horse whose left hoof rings hollow, whatever that means. Still, amid the tension and suspicion, small moments of light persist. You catch the herbalist slipping an apple to the isolated peddler, the cook leaving a fresh loaf outside the nursemaid's door, children braiding red thread for each other's wrists. These gestures don't dispel the fear, but they soften its edge, reminding you that humanity endures, even when belief and doubt wage their invisible wars. As darkness settles, the castle feels oddly quieter, as if holding its breath for the next rumour the next shadow at the window. You close your eyes and listen to the sound of distant prayers, the low hum of wind against stone, and the occasional creak of wood as the old walls settle around you. A fortress not just against disease, but against the fear and imagination that rise in its wake. You wake to the soft, frantic patter of tiny feet. The kitchen boy, usually only quick when sweets are involved, sprints past you clutching a broom, a look of pure terror on his face. Hot on his heels are two maids wielding pokers, their eyes darting toward every shadow and dark corner of the hallway. You soon discover the reason for this early morning chaos. The rats have taken over. You duck as a mouse darts across your path, heading for the warmth of the kitchen. The cook, formidable even on her mildest day, is at her wit's end. She's waging a full-scale war on anything with a tail and whiskers. Traps are reset. Pots and lids clang, and the cat, normally content to lounge by the hearth, has become a minor celebrity, paraded from room to room like royalty. Mainstream historical fact: rats and mice thrived in the crowded, unsanitary environments of medieval castles, and their numbers exploded during periods of lockdown, making them both a nuisance and harbingers of disease. Today, however, there's a feverish urgency in every action. The rats aren't just an annoyance, they're a possible link to the pestilence. Even the children have noticed, telling wild tales about the Rat King leading his subjects in a nighttime parade down the main stairs. The lord of the castle orders a rat hunt, promising a penny per tail, and for a few hours the halls are filled with shrieks, laughter, and the gleeful pursuit of rodents. Some of the older boys brag about their tally, while the herbalist mutters about bad omens and sprinkles dried mint at every doorway. But the rats are clever, and so are the cats. There's an uneasy alliance between humans and their furry defenders. Each cat has its favourite hiding spot, and every servant has a story about a feline hero whose single pawed saved the pantry from ruin. One tabby, dubbed Lady Claus, becomes especially famous for her habit of presenting her trophies at the foot of the Lord's chair during supper, earning her a place of honour and extra scraps for the rest of the season. Fringe tidbit: some castles even maintained small colonies of ferrets or weasels, unleashing them in storerooms and cellars to root out vermin. These working pets were considered both lucky and slightly magical, and the children now lobby fiercely for a pet ferret, promising to care for it in exchange for less rats and more stories. As the day wears on, the castle's attitude toward its animal companions grows almost superstitious. The priest blesses the cats, and the blacksmith swears that the presence of a ginger cat in the smithy brings good luck and healthy horses. You overhear maids debating whether it's better to have black cats for protection or tabby cats for luck, while the cook grumbles that she'd settle for any cat that can keep the bread bin safe. Historians still argue whether medieval people fully understood the connection between rats, fleas, and pestilence. Some suggest that, while they noticed the pattern, the real cause remained hidden behind layers of superstition and guesswork. Others point to records of towns rewarding rat catchers and even instituting communal rat hunts as evidence of a primitive but genuine attempt at pest control. Still, not everyone is convinced that more cats mean fewer problems. You hear stories from older servants about a time when too many cats led to cat plagues, yowling, fighting, and the occasional kitten found in a shoe. The kitchen staff joke that soon the castle will be ruled by the Cat Council, and a small group of boys stage a mock coronation, crowning Lady Claus with a battered napkin and parading her through the halls. The rat hunt continues into the night, but no matter how many are caught, more always seem to appear.
We realise that, in the end, the castle's relationship with its animal residents is both practical and deeply symbolic, a daily battle for control, comfort, and maybe even hope in the midst of uncertainty. Fringe detail: some folks now pin tiny bells on the cats' collars, believing the sound drives away not just rats, but evil spirits as well.
As darkness falls, you settle into your bunk, listening to the soft click of cat claws on the flagstones, and the distant rustle of something in the pantry. The castle is quieter, but never truly silent. There's always something scurrying, hunting, or prowling, just out of sight. For a moment, you marvel at the strange alliances forged in these walls. Human, cat, even rat, all drawn together by the pressures of survival. You drift off to sleep with Lady Claus curled at your feet, and the faint hope that, tomorrow, the castle will be a little less crowded, and maybe just a little luckier for the efforts of its most unlikely guardians. A sombre bell tolls at sunrise, sending tremors of dread through the castle's chilly halls. You rub your eyes, shoulders aching from another night spent listening to the restless scurrying of creatures above the rafters and the anxious murmurs of the servants below. It's clear that, if the pestilence is to be kept at bay, stricter measures are needed. Today, the new rules arrive not just for the people, but for the animals, the food, and even the smallest details of daily life. You line up in the main courtyard with the others, shivering in the thin morning light. The steward, usually a genial presence, is now as unyielding as the stone walls behind him. In a voice sharpened by worry, he lists the new protocols. Mainstream historical fact. During outbreaks, castles often implemented strict isolation tactics, dividing the population into groups and restricting movement within their own walls. The lord's family is to remain on the upper floors. Servants and labourers are assigned to the lower halls, and the sick or anyone suspected of being ill are to be moved to makeshift quarters near the stables, where the wind will carry away bad humours.
No one is allowed to enter the castle from outside. Messengers must leave their letters in a basket at the postern gate to be collected only after they've rested in the sun for a day, just in case the pestilence lingers on the parchment.
Animals too are subject to quarantine. The horses are brushed and examined daily, while the dogs and cats are watched for signs of listlessness or strange behaviour. Even the castle's caged songbirds are given a health check, though the youngest page mostly uses it as an excuse to admire their bright plumage. Movement is strictly rationed. Certain staircases are blocked, and guards are posted at the entrance to each wing. Meals are delivered on trays and left at doors. Only the kitchen staff and a handful of trusted attendants are allowed to move freely between sections. You're assigned to the laundry, where steaming tubs of water and heaps of linens await. The laundry mistress, known for her hawk-like attention to detail, inspects everyone's hands and insists that no garment leave her domain unwashed, even if it means the lord must do without his favourite cloak. Fringe tidbit, some castles went so far as to assign quarantine markers to individuals, ribbons, bells, or coloured sashes, so that those moving between sections could be tracked at all times. Today, you're given a scrap of red cloth to tie around your arm. It's not exactly a badge of honour, but at least you're not alone. Everyone wears one, from the grumpiest blacksmith to the quietest scullery maid. It doesn't take long for the tension to set in. The lord's family, isolated in their lofty chambers, grows irritable. Children peer through the balustrades, hoping to catch glimpses of the action below. The servants, pressed together in the lower halls, grow fractious. Old feuds re-emerge over sleeping quarters, chores and missing cups. You see friendships tested as people jostle for better beds or try to avoid being assigned to the danger zones, the kitchen, the sick room, or worst of all, the privy. Pets, too, suffer from the new room. The dogs whine at the locked doors, unused to being separated from their favourite companions. The cats, sensing the change in routine, vanish into crawl spaces, emerging only for food and the occasional chin scratch. The horses stamp in their stalls, spooked by the tension in the air. Even the songbirds fall oddly silent, their usual chirping replaced by the steady creak of ropes and the low hum of anxious voices. Historians still argue whether such rigid isolation tactics truly made a difference, or simply bred new forms of hardship. Some believe that, by separating the healthy from the sick, castles bought themselves precious time. Others point out that close quarters among the healthy often led to outbreaks anyway, as hidden carriers spread the disease before anyone realized it. What's certain is that, for the people inside these walls, the world has shrunk to a handful of rooms, stairwells, and guarded passageways. You adjust to the new normal, making the best of things where you can. The laundry becomes a hub for quiet conversation and whispered jokes. You learn to fold sheets with a flick of the wrist, and become adept at sneaking an extra crust of bread to the friendliest dog. When the sun finally sets and you're released from duty, you retreat to your corner of the dormitory, grateful for even a sliver of privacy. As you settle in for the night, you can hear the castle breathe around you, pipes creaking, dogs sighing, the occasional thump of footsteps overhead. In the uneasy silence, you realize that survival isn't just about fighting the pestilence. It's about adapting to new rules, forging new routines, and clinging to small comforts. With the doors bolted and the world held at bay, you find a fragile sense of safety in the rhythm of laundry, laughter, and the company of those facing the same uncertain dawn. You wake to a grey, drizzly morning, and the faint scent of herbs on the air. The castle's corridors are quieter today, even the children seem subdued. Word has spread that the healers are taking charge. A delegation of herbalists, midwives, and the one-eyed old woman everyone calls Grandmother Fox are making the rounds, while the court physician struts through the hall in his best robe, clutching a bundle of dried leeches. It's the unofficial healers who draw the largest crowds. You trail behind the herbalist as she bustles from chamber to chamber, baskets loaded with dried chamomile, sage and lavender. Mainstream historical fact. During outbreaks, castles often relied on a patchwork of official and unofficial medical expertise. While university-trained physicians prescribed complicated concoctions and performed bloodletting, herbalists and midwives provided practical remedies, teas, poultices, ointments, and simple advice on hygiene that sometimes proved far more effective. The midwife, hands roughened by years of work, leads a crew of young maids in preparing plague bags. Little cloth pouches filled with strong-smelling herbs and a pinch of vinegar-soaked wool. These are handed out to everyone to be worn around the neck or tucked in a sleeve. You slip one on and are instantly enveloped in a cloud of pungent rosemary and mint, which, if nothing else, seems to clear your head. Meanwhile, Grandmother Fox, who claims to know every herb from the castle moat to the top of the watchtower, gathers her own remedies. A boiled brew of elderflower for fever, nettle tea for strength, and a sticky syrup of honey and garlic that the children loathe, but take without protest. Fringe tidbit. Some healers believe that rubbing cut onions on doorways or hanging bundles of rue and yarrow above beds would trap the bad air before it reached the lungs. By midday, the castle smells like a vegetable market during a thunderstorm. The official physician, not to be outdone, makes his rounds with leeches, cupping glasses, and a pompous speech about the four humours. His patients, mostly noblemen, are subjected to bleeding and sweating, followed by long rest in a stuffy room. The servants whisper that anyone treated by the physician is more likely to die of boredom than the pestilence. You notice that most of the staff avoid him, slipping away when he approaches and seeking out the herbalist or midwife instead. A new rule is announced: sick rooms must be aired twice a day, with rushes changed and fresh herbs scattered on the floor. The herbalist's apprentices run about, stuffing juniper into fireplaces and tossing sage onto the hearth. The midwife insists that every patient be given a warm compress and a story to calm the nerves. Children recover quickly, while adults less prone to believe in fairy tales do their best with herbal draughts and a whispered prayer. Historians still argue whether medieval healers helped or hindered during outbreaks. Some believe that, by providing comfort and sensible remedies, they kept morale high and sometimes slowed the spread of disease. Others note that many treatments, official or folk, did little more than provide hope and distraction. Still, You suspect that hope itself is a kind of medicine, and the castle seems brighter for it. As evening falls, you help the herbalist prepare one last round of plague tea, doling it out with a wink and a whispered joke about keeping your ears from falling off. The kitchen staff share a rare laugh, toasting the healers with mugs of watered wine. Even the Lord, weary from days of quarantine, joins in, thanking the healers with a shy nod. Later, as you slip into your bunk, you notice the comforting weight of the herb pouch on your chest and the faint scent of lavender in the air. The castle is still tense, still afraid, but there is a sense of order, even optimism, in the careful rituals of the healers. You drift off to sleep with the image of Grandmother Fox tucking a sprig of rosemary behind your ear, promising that tomorrow will be better. The dawn brings a hush over the castle, one so deep you can hear the drip of rain from the battlements and the distant muffled bleating of sheep outside the walls. But inside, a different kind of tension thrums, a divide that is as old as the stones beneath your feet.
The lines between noble and servant have never felt so clear, or so unfair.
Quarantine and pestilence have forced the household to draw new boundaries, and you can feel the strain in every corner of the keep. You pass the grand staircase, roped off and guarded, leading to the family's upper quarters, now off limits to all but a select few. The Lord's children peer over the banister, faces pale and bored, watched by a stern nursemaid. You catch snatches of conversation. The lady of the castle arguing with the steward about supplies, the Lord sending quiet messages to his cousins across the valley. Mainstream historical fact. During times of crisis, noble families retreated to the safest and most comfortable parts of their castles, often leaving servants to cope in overcrowded, draughty chambers below. For the upper floors, life continues with an odd, tense luxury. Meals are still delivered on silver platters, and tapestries are drawn tight to keep out the chill. Servants enter only by invitation, and even then, they must wear cloth masks over nose and mouth, newly stitched by the lady's personal seamstress. Board games, lute music, and stories are the main diversions, but you can sense the undercurrent of fear. The noble children argue over the rules of chess. The youngest pouts for her favourite doll, and the heir is kept close by his father's side, learning the sombre art of reading ledgers and letters by candlelight. Meanwhile, the world below the main stairs feels entirely different. In the servants' quarters, the air is thick with bodies and the competing scents of sweat, straw, and boiled onions. The hearth blazes day and night, but it barely takes the edge off the damp. Sleep is snatched in odd corners, with makeshift beds crowded together. Privacy is a memory, and quiet a luxury few can afford. You share a meal in the lower hall, elbow to elbow with the kitchen staff, stable boys, and scullery maids. Food is simple, often a thin broth stretched with barley, or bread that's more crust than crumb. You catch jokes about the healing power of old cheese and the questionable origin of the sausages. Still, there's camaraderie, shared stories, whispered gossip, and the kind of black humour that only flourishes in adversity. One of the maids stages a mock court, complete with a broom for a sceptre and a mop for a throne. Laughter echoes down the stairwell, chasing away the cold at least for a while. Fringe tidbit. Some castles even created secret passageways or servant stairs to allow food, water, and messages to move between floors with minimal contact. Rumours spread that there's a hidden door behind the buttery leading straight to the Lord's study, but no one is brave enough to look. As the days wear on, the contrast becomes sharper. The nobles fret about boredom, privacy, and the dwindling supply of spiced wine. The servants worry about coughs, draughts, and whether there will be enough bread next week.
Quarrels break out. A laundress accuses the cook of hoarding flour. 2 squires fight over a warm blanket, and a young boy is caught sneaking apples from the Lord's private store. Punishments are swift, but never as harsh as the fear in the air.
Historians still debate whether these divisions helped castles survive or sowed the seeds of unrest. Some argue that strict separation protected the noble family, allowing them to recover quickly and maintain order. Others note that the resentment bred below stairs sometimes burst out in rebellion, quiet sabotage, whispered secrets, or outright theft.
You wonder if, when this is all over, the keep will ever feel whole again.
Yet there are moments of kindness that defy the rules. The lady's maid slips extra apples to the nursery, the old gardener leaves bunches of lavender at the sick-room door, and the steward himself sits with a feverish stable boy, holding his hand through the long night. Even the lord, usually stern and distant, is seen carrying blankets to the infirmary, face grim but determined. At night you lie in the dark and listen. The faint sounds of laughter drifting from the upper floors, the low murmurs of prayer from the crowded dormitory below, the crackle of a hearth that burns for everyone, no matter their rank. In these small acts, you find hope, a fragile bridge across the divide, a reminder that in the end, everyone in the castle is waiting for the same thing, a new dawn, and the return of normal life. You wake to a knock at your door, the sound sharper than usual. It's a messenger, one of the youngest, sent with a hasty note in hand, and a look of barely suppressed dread. The castle's isolation has not only sealed its doors to the world, but also made every form of contact a possible threat. Supplies and news must still reach the lord, but every letter, every loaf of bread, every bundle of kindling passed through the portcullis now carries a shadow of risk. Today, the castle's uneasy relationship with the outside is under the microscope. The steward stands at the inner gate, flanked by 2 guards, as a merchant caravan approaches. The merchants, faces covered with cloth veils, carry their wares at arm's length and shout their prices from behind a hastily erected barrier. You watch as the system unfolds. Coin is left in a bowl of vinegar, parcels are unwrapped and left on a wooden table to air, and no words are exchanged closer than a dozen paces. Mainstream historical fact: medieval castles during plague outbreaks developed elaborate protocols for receiving visitors and goods, often forcing outsiders to wait in quarantine huts or at distant way stations before even approaching the main gate. The messenger system is fraught with tension. Only a handful of trusted boys and one remarkably nimble girl are allowed to ferry messages between the inner and outer gates. They carry wax-sealed letters with gloved hands, and every message is inspected before it goes up to the Lord's study. Some are trivial, requests for more candles, news of a cousin's wedding. Others, whispered between the lines, are updates on who is sick, who has died, who is begging for sanctuary. You are assigned to help with today's delivery. The rules are strict. You must wash your hands in strong lye, wear a linen mask, and carry the bundle on a wooden tray. The merchant, a dour-faced man from the next valley, eyes you warily as he hands over a small sack of flour and a pot of honey. No one speaks of price. Barter is the new currency. Last week the castle traded a cask of cider for a dozen wax candles and a bundle of turnips. Fringe tidbit: in some regions, payment for goods during outbreaks was made not in coin, but in goods left to rest in a safe zone, with both sides trusting that neither would steal while the other waited out of sight. Despite the precautions, suspicion lingers. The guards debate whether to burn the wrappings on the new goods, or simply bury them in the old midden. A heated argument breaks out over a package of dried fish. Did the merchant touch it with bare hands? Is it safe to eat, or should it be thrown out? You watch the Lord tense and silent, as he weighs the need for supplies against the risk of letting pestilence inside. The solution for today is compromise. The food is cooked twice over, and the rest is left in the cold pantry for 3 days before anyone dares touch it.
Messages from outside are treated with the same caution. Letters from family are read by the priest,
who then airs them out in the sun for a full day before delivering the news to the anxious recipients. Sometimes what begins as a hopeful missive turns sour. News of illness in a neighbouring manor or of a beloved cousin taken ill. You see grown men and women clutching these letters, weighing the comfort of connection against the terror of what might be creeping across the page. Historians still argue whether these elaborate precautions made a difference or simply gave people the illusion of control. Some say that these careful rituals delayed the spread of disease and saved lives. Others claim that, by the time word of a new case arrived, the pestilence had already breached every wall worth defending. In either case, the castle's rhythms have shifted. Contact with the outside is now a source of both hope and dread. The children of the castle watch the exchange with fascination, turning it into a game. Who can shout safe the loudest when a parcel is unwrapped? Who can carry the most messages without breaking the rules? A group of them organizes a quarantine post for their dolls, lining up stuffed animals and giving them tiny badges of office.
Even in fear, life finds its rituals, and laughter returns for a brief, blessed hour. You help the kitchen staff unpack the last of the goods, eyes watering from the harsh lie and the tension in the air.
As the sun sets and the outer gate clangs shut, you catch your breath and realize how much the world has changed in so short a time. Every message, every loaf of bread, every small luxury is now precious, a hard-won victory against both scarcity and fear. You drift to bed that night with the smell of lies still on your hands, and the memory of a child's giggle echoing in your mind. The castle may be closed to the world, but hope, risk, and the desperate need for connection continue to sneak through, even in the smallest packages. The days creep by, each one blending into the next, until you find it difficult to remember when the castle last hummed with the easy bustle of market day. Now, the air is thick with a nervous stillness. At the moment before a storm breaks, because with every passing hour, the castle's economy tightens its belt another notch. The markets in the village have closed, the flow of coins and goods has nearly dried up, and the great halls, once echoing with the clink of goblets and laughter, seem quieter and colder than ever before. You start your morning in the castle's counting room, watching the steward hunched over his ledgers, lips pressed tight, fingers stained with ink and worry. Mainstream historical fact: during outbreaks, the normal routines of commerce ground to a halt. Markets froze, caravans vanished, and even the wealthiest lords found their coffers draining faster than expected. The steward mutters about lost rents, unpaid debts, and empty promises from men who used to pay on time. The craft people, the blacksmith, the weaver, the cooper, the wheelwright, meet in the chilly outer yard to discuss what little work remains. Horses are left unshod, broken tools go unrepaired, then everyone barters what they can. The weaver trades a bolt of scratchy linen for 2 jars of honey. The baker gives up a loaf of bread for a sack of firewood. You watch a silent exchange of glances, trust and suspicion both on display. Fringe tidbit: in some castles, tokens or carved wooden tallies were used in place of money, each stamped with the lord's crest and redeemable after the pestilence is gone. A few such tokens now circulate among the castle folk, little more than symbols of hope for a better tomorrow. Trade with the outside has nearly vanished. Even the old peddler who once hawked combs, ribbons, and bright bits of glass has disappeared. The only new arrivals are rumours. A neighbouring manor whose tenants have begun growing their own food. A distant city where gold is no longer worth a loaf of bread. A story about a miser who hid his last coins under the hearth, only to have them stolen by a desperate servant. As the official economy falters, an unofficial one flourishes. You watch the kitchen staff barter eggs for onions, the nursemaid trade, mending a shirt for an extra blanket, and the cook swap a secret recipe for a bowl of porridge thickened with last year's dried peas. A few clever souls try to set up a system of favours, a kind of social currency, tracked in whispered promises, and IOUs scratched into the undersides of bunks. Tensions simmer, arguments break out over who gets the last crust of bread, who is hoarding the dwindling supply of candles, and whether the miller's daughter is cheating at trade by watering down her cider. You step in to mediate a quarrel between two apprentices, fighting over a length of twine, only to realize that even small scraps now hold real value. Everyone is forced to make do, to patch old shoes with bits of felt, to mend tunics until they're more patch than fabric. The lord and lady, sensing the unrest, call a meeting in the great hall. The atmosphere is heavy as they encourage everyone to endure with patience, promising that their sacrifices will be rewarded once the crisis has passed. You can't help but notice the skepticism in the eyes of the servants, and even some of the knights. The kitchen boy, normally quick with a joke, mutters that you can't eat patience or promises when your belly's empty. Historians still argue whether these small, desperate economies helped households survive or only increased hardship. Some say that barter kept communities together, allowing people to meet their needs when money was worthless. Others note that the rise of petty theft, jealousy, and black market trade undermined trust and order, sometimes tearing households apart when they needed unity most. As the days blur, you grow resourceful. You join a group learning to twist nettle fibers into rough string, help the herbalist turn stale bread into dumplings for soup, and help the stable hands collect shed horsehair to stuff pillows for the sick room.
You even carve your own wooden token, marking it with a hopeful sun, just in case such things become valuable again. But it isn't all grim.
As the castle settles into another long, silent night, you count your blessings, however small, and cling to the hope that, when the gates finally open, there will be enough left to build a new beginning. As another colourless dawn slips in through the arrow slits, the air in the castle grows heavier with the worry of hungry days ahead. The larders are no longer bursting with sacks and barrels. Instead, each shelf is a careful arrangement of hopes and calculations. Today, you're assigned to help the kitchen staff with one of their most crucial and exhausting tasks, keeping rot and spoilage at bay. You start in the dimly lit pantry, its walls lined with earthenware jars, baskets of wizened turnips, and hanging sides of salted pork. Mainstream historical fact, medieval food preservation was both an art and a necessity. Without reliable refrigeration, castles depended on salting, smoking, pickling, drying and fermenting to stretch the harvest and stave off hunger. The kitchen's best efforts are now tested by the length of the lockdown and the unpredictability of the weather outside. The cook inspects everything with a suspicious eye. Barrels of salted herring are cracked open, and any hint of sourness earns a dark scowl. Smoked sausages are unstrung, sniffed and checked for mould. There's an entire ritual to the process. If it smells good, it's turned, aired and hung again. If not, it's quietly carried out to the midden before the kitchen staff can argue. Better to waste a little than to poison the lot. The cook mutters, though you see her wince at every scrap thrown away. Fringe tidbit, pickling juice is treated almost as a magical elixir. When you suggest tossing the cloudy brine from an old jar of cucumbers, the herbalist recoils in horror, insisting it's good for washing hands, easing sore throats, and most importantly, pickling something else. The kitchen staff get creative, turning shriveled apples into spiced compotes, and using stale bread for pottage or toasted to soak up soup. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. But the challenges multiply. Dried beans and peas, once reliable, are sometimes infested with tiny beetles. Salted meat grows hard and grey in the cold. Some jars are found with cracked seals, and the cook shakes her head, worried that gremlins in the pantry are at work again. One of the pages, wide-eyed and earnest, claims he's seen the ghost of a baker hovering over the flour barrel, mourning the last of the summer wheat. You find that every meal now begins with a negotiation. The stew is bulked with more roots and less meat. The last of the summer onions are carefully rationed, and there's a quiet ceremony to opening a new jar of preserved cherries, saved for the sick or for feast days. The children get lessons in stretching butter, learning to mix it with crushed beans or boiled milk to make it last. Sometimes the kitchen staff make a game of it. Who can invent the strangest combination of what's left? There's laughter at the table when someone serves up dried fish with wild garlic and honey, or a pie filled with surprise fermented cabbage and a handful of walnuts. You join in, enjoying the momentary respite from worry, even if the food is more creative than delicious. But spoilage is a constant threat. The laundry maid returns with tales of a strange smell in the north wing, prompting a midnight inspection and the discovery of a forgotten sack of turnips turning to mush. The sick room staff request more vinegar and salt, which are doled out with care. Any suspicion of illness brings double caution. Food for the infirmary is boiled twice, and the utensils are scalded and left to dry in the sun. Historians still argue whether medieval preservation techniques genuinely kept people safer or merely changed the risks. Some records suggest that careful salting and pickling prevented many cases of illness. Others note that botulism, spoiled grain, and tainted meat caused outbreaks of their own, hidden beneath the surface of the pestilence. You hear kitchen debates about the right amount of smoke for hams, and whether cheese with blue veins is safe or cursed. You notice how the process shapes the mood of the castle. There's a kind of grim pride in making do, in finding ways to make bland food taste of something new. Every successful loaf of bread, baked from a mixture of rye, oats, and just enough barley to keep it from being rock hard, is a small victory. When a new batch of pickled eggs emerges from its brine, the whole kitchen gathers to taste, sharing smiles and hopeful glances. As the sun sets, you're asked to help wrap the last of the good apples in linen to keep them from bruising. The herbalist tucks a sprig of rosemary into each basket for luck, and the cook invites you to stay for a rare treat: honeyed walnuts on toasted bread, served with a thin cider. For a moment, the fear recedes. The castle glows with candlelight, the air full of the warm, sharp scent of vinegar and herbs. You realize that, here in the kitchen, survival is as much about creativity and shared hope as it is about food.
As you slip away to your bed, you carry with you the tang of pickles on your tongue and a new appreciation for the strange, resourceful world behind every castle meal. Tomorrow the rationing and inventing will start again, but tonight you sleep with a full belly, and the comfort of small victories hard won.
It's the third week of lockdown, and the weight of uncertainty presses on every shoulder. The routines of quarantine have grown stale, and the castle's mood swings between restless boredom and raw anxiety. The air hangs thick, not only with the scent of boiled onions and vinegar, but with the unspoken fear that the pestilence, if it doesn't claim you outright, will bore you to death first. Survival, it turns out, is as much about keeping the mind occupied as the body. You wait to the sound of a lute strumming in the corridor. One of the minstrels hired months ago for the wedding of the Lord's cousin, and then stranded by the outbreak, has declared it his duty to lift spirits. You hear his reedy voice floating down the hall, singing a silly ballad about a knight who lost his armour and had to storm the castle, dressed only in pies. Laughter drifts up from the kitchen, and even the stone-faced guards can't help but crack a smile. Mainstream historical fact: minstrels, musicians and jesters played a vital role in castle life, especially during long winters or periods of isolation. Music, storytelling, and communal games provided distraction, comfort, and a vital sense of normalcy when the world outside was anything but. The Lord, sensing the tension, decrees a feast, not the grand affairs of old, but a supper with what little can be spared. Trenchers of bread, bowls of hearty stew, a few thin slices of salted pork, and a surprise spiced apples from the last barrel, sweetened with the dregs of last year's honey. As you gather in the great hall, spaced out in smaller groups than usual, the candles glow brighter and the tapestries seem to shine with renewed colour. A handful of minstrels perform, and the jester, adorned in a mask fashioned from cabbage leaves, tumbles and jokes to the delight of the youngest children. But feasting is only one remedy for gloom. The castle's inhabitants invent games and challenges to pass the endless hours. In the kitchens, a pottage contest is held to see who can make the tastiest stew from the least appetizing ingredients. A few brave souls attempt to juggle apples, while the nursemaid organizes a contest to see who can recite the longest tale without forgetting a single line. Children stage a puppet show using flour sacks, acting out a daring escape from the clutches of the plague ogre. Even the stables join in the fun, with the stable master organizing a slow race for the castle's oldest, laziest mule. Fringe tidbit: some castles believed in the power of communal laughter to ward off evil. It was not uncommon for lords to sponsor competitions for the funniest story or most ridiculous dance. The winner received a sprig of rosemary believed to guard against illness, and a place of honour at the table. Still, morale is a delicate thing. Not every distraction lands as planned. When the blacksmith attempts to write a love poem for the laundry maid, the resulting verse is so dire that the minstrels compose a song about it, which becomes the running joke for days. A few attempts at dancing end with sprained ankles, and even more laughter. Sometimes the old fears return, whispers that too much merriment will offend the spirits, or that laughter, like the wind, could carry pestilence through the halls. The priest shakes his head at these superstitions, but agrees to bless the games just in case. Historians still argue whether these efforts at distraction had any real effect on survival. Some suggest that strong morale helped castles endure longer sieges, while others claim that merriment made people careless, leading to new outbreaks. What's certain is that the moments of laughter, however brief, become anchors in memory, proof that hope can flourish even in the hardest season. The feast winds down, and as the tables are cleared, the Lord gives a toast to light in darkness and laughter in sorrow. A hush falls, then applause, and you sense that, if only for an evening, the castle feels more like a home than a prison. Later, you find yourself in a quiet corner, teaching the youngest children a new game with pebbles and bits of string. The herbalist joins, spinning tales about clever foxes and wise old owls. For a little while, even the elders forget the world outside, and you notice smiles where there were frowns, laughter where there was tension, and the first hint of song returning to the lips of those who'd been silent for days. As you finally retire, you carry the warmth of the feast and the echo of laughter with you. The world beyond the castle walls may still be uncertain, but within these ancient stones, hope is being quietly rebuilt, one story, one song, and one small kindness at a time. The sun rises thin and pale, struggling to break through a morning mist that clings to the castle walls. Today the castle wakes not to the clang of work or the scurry of anxious feet, but to a procession of whispered prayers, muttered hopes, and the sharp, clean scent of burning candles. In times of pestilence, faith and ritual often fill the cracks that fear leaves behind. You slip into the chapel, its small space packed with servants, pages and a scattering of knights, all kneeling in the pews. The priest stands before the altar, voice rough from nights of sleepless vigils, leading the household in a litany of prayers for deliverance and health. A new relic, a chipped silver box said to contain the toe bone of a local saint, has been set on the altar, drawing hopeful glances and a few discreet touches for luck. Mainstream historical fact: throughout medieval Europe, relics were prized as powerful shields against sickness, and castles would sometimes borrow or even buy new relics from nearby abbeys when outbreaks struck. The belief was that the mere presence of a holy object keep illness at bay. This morning, the prayers are longer, the voices softer. A priest leads a procession through the halls, swinging a censer heavy with frankincense. He blesses each doorway, anoints the Lord and Lady with holy oil, and instructs everyone to carry a token, a scrap of cloth blessed with holy water, a dried flower, or a coin marked with the sign of the cross. You notice the children following along, eyes wide, trying to remember the words to every prayer. Outside the chapel, preparations begin for a ritual circuit of the castle walls. Servants hang bundles of rosemary and yarrow from the windows. The herbalist hands out small charms. Knots of red thread, pouches of lavender, wax discs, stamped with symbols insisting they be worn at all times for luck, and because you never know. You watch the kitchen staff attach their charms to ladles. The blacksmith pins his to the door of the forge, and even the stable master braids his into the mane of his favourite horse. The mood in the castle is hushed, a mixture of reverence and desperate hope. As the bells toll for noon, everyone gathers in the main courtyard for the procession. The priest carries the relic at the head, followed by the Lord and Lady, their children, and every soul in the household, even the dogs and cats, are swept along in the parade. The scent of incense, rosemary, and melting wax fills the air, blending with the smell of stone and old wood. Fringe tidbit: some castles invited wandering monks, flagellants, or even holy fools to walk the walls or perform elaborate rituals meant to ward off evil. In one story, a wandering hermit once convinced an entire household to sing a nonsense song for a full hour, claiming it would confuse the spirits and keep the pestilence away. You hear a page joke that maybe a good dance would work just as well, and before you know it, someone is tapping out a rhythm on a cooking pot, and a ragged line of servants begins to dance around the courtyard, laughter mingling with the solemn prayers. After the ritual, the castle settles into an uneasy calm. The relic remains on display in the chapel, a silent anchor for the hopes and fears of everyone inside. You notice how people linger a little longer near the altar, whispering private prayers or leaving offerings of bread, coins, or sprigs of lavender. Historians still argue whether these rituals did more than comfort the mind. Some say that faith and the sense of community helped stave off panic and despair. Others point out that rituals could breed superstition, distracting people from practical measures. But in this moment, the castle's spirits seem lighter, a rare gift during weeks of hardship. As dusk falls, candles are lit in every window, tiny beacons against the encroaching dark. You join the kitchen staff for a quiet meal, each of you wearing your new charms, each carrying the echo of the day's prayers in your heart. The world outside is still uncertain, but inside the walls, hope is stitched together with faith, memory, and a little honest laughter. You drift off to sleep with the sweet scent of lavender beside your pillow and the soft glow of candlelight on the stones, thinking that perhaps the greatest protection of all is believing that you're not alone. The castle's nights grow quieter, yet the faint sounds of coughs, murmured prayers, and the clink of bottles in the shadowed passages remind you that the fight is not only against boredom, hunger, or fear, but against the slow, relentless march of illness. In the makeshift infirmary near the old kitchen, the air is sharp with the tang of vinegar, the sweet spicy waft of heated herbs, and the low rhythmic chanting of hopeful caregivers. You are summoned to help today, a day of tending the sick, learning remedies, and facing the strange courage required to care for others when there are few clear answers. You enter the infirmary with a basin of warm water, your hands already dry from so much scrubbing. The sick lie on straw pallets, bundled in old cloaks and blankets, faces flushed or pale by turns. Mainstream historical fact: medieval infirmaries were often improvised, crammed into any available space, run by a hodgepodge of herbalists, midwives, priests, and whoever had a free hand. The approach was a blend of faith, folk wisdom, and whatever passed for modern medicine. The castle's staff, from the herbalist to the lord's wife, now rotate shifts beside the beds. You learn the rituals quickly. Each patient is offered broth laced with garlic and sage, or a spoonful of honey if they're strong enough to swallow. Vinegar-dampened cloths are pressed to feverish brows, and hands are washed in water steeped with bay leaves, herbs believed to ward off evil and disease. A herbalist oversees the preparation of teas, chamomile to calm the heart, elderflower for sweats, a pungent brew of yarrow and nettle for anyone strong enough to stomach it. She's equal parts gentle and bossy, her humour a lifeline in the midst of worry. Fringe tidbit. The midwife claims that music can soothe not only the soul, but the body. She encourages anyone able to sing or humour tune, no matter how feeble, to do so. For a time, the room fills with a thin, wobbly chorus of lullabies and old harvest songs. Even the squire with a splitting headache manages a few lines, and the kitchen maid invents verses as she works, determined to make even the most bedridden smile. Care isn't just about potions and songs. The herbalist shows you how to rub a patient's chest with rosemary oil, to change bed linens without raising a cloud of dust, and to use a fresh sprig of mint or sage as a breath freshener for the ill. The old nurse, whose hands are gnarled from years of labour, teaches you how to check for fever and, if needed, how to break it, wrapping the sick in damp sheets and fanning them gently. Not every remedy works. Some patients grow weaker, slipping into fever dreams. The priest sits by their side, murmuring prayers, anointing foreheads with holy oil, and promising sometimes more to himself than anyone that their souls will be kept safe. The children, resilient as weeds, seem to recover quickly. Adults, weighed down by age and worry, are less fortunate. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval nursing, but some argue that care and company were as vital as any medicine. When the gloom settles, there are lighter moments. The lord's daughter sneaks in to sit with the sickest child, reading aloud from an old storybook. The cook slips bits of candied fruit to those able to eat, and you watch a bedridden knight struggle to keep down a mouthful of onion broth, joking that it's more fearsome than facing an enemy in the lists.
Laughter, even strained, brightens the dim space.
You see exhaustion etched in every caregiver's face, but also stubborn pride and gentleness. The infirmary becomes a world of its own. Small victories are celebrated, while losses are mourned with a quiet dignity. You find yourself whispering promises to each patient that, if nothing else, you'll be there with a cool cloth and a friendly word. As night falls, you help change the rushes and sweep the flagstones, letting the fresh scent of herbs linger. The sick settle into sleep, and so do the weary caregivers. You tiptoe out, heart heavy but strangely hopeful, realizing that even in a world so fraught with danger, the human desire to comfort, to care, and to share warmth is an answer to the darkness. Dawn finds you in the stable yard, shivering beneath a sky the colour of old pewter. The castle is stirring as usual, but today there's a new commotion. The animals, for once, have become as central to the Pestilence defences as the people. Throughout the courtyard, you hear the yapping of dogs, the indignant mewling of cats, and the low, steady coo of pigeons on the highest ledges. Pest control has become a strategy for survival, and suddenly everyone is an expert on which creature keeps the most threats at bay. You start your day feeding scraps to the castle dogs, who have recently been promoted from mere companions to essential workers. Mainstream historical fact, medieval castles often relied on dogs and cats to keep rat populations under control. When pestilence struck, these animals were not only tolerated, but celebrated, sometimes even blessed by the priest, to guard against foul humours. You watch as a wiry terrier sniffs out a rat beneath the granary stairs, and the cook, tosses him the choicest bone for his trouble. But Pestilence, paranoia cuts both ways. A few of the older servants whisper that animals might carry sickness. The stablemaster's wife recalls tales of a neighbouring manor that drowned all its cats during an outbreak, fearing they were unclean. In this castle, though, the cats are treated like minor nobility. Lady Claus, the famous tabby, sleeps on a cushion in the solar, her collar adorned with a small bell to ward off both mice and spirits. You spot a group of children crafting tiny capes for their favourite felines, and parading them through the halls. One even attempts to crown a ginger Tom with a daisy chain, declaring him Lord Protector of the larder.
Fringe tidbit. In especially grand castles, falcons were sometimes pressed into service, not just for hunting, but for chasing away crows and other birds thought to spread disease.
You get a rare invitation to the Mews, where a young falconer demonstrates how his charge, a sleek young merlin, can frighten away every pigeon on the roof with a single cry.
The page boys gather in awe, secretly hoping for a molted feather as a lucky charm. The humans, too, are subject to new pest control measures. Shoes are checked for fleas at the door, and the herbalist insists that a dab of mint oil behind the ears will keep lice away. The laundry mistress boils linens with bay leaves, convinced the scent wards off bedbugs. The old nurse ties sachets of dried lavender and wormwood to every bedpost, and children are instructed to sit still and not scratch, which lasts all of 5 minutes. Historians still debate whether any of these animal-based strategies truly worked. Some suggest that an abundance of cats and diligent dog patrols did help keep rat populations in check, which, in hindsight, may have prevented some spread of disease.
Others argue that, in the panic of pestilence, even beloved pets became scapegoats, especially if a favoured dog fell ill, or a cat was found dead in suspicious circumstances.
As you help the stable hands brush down the horses, you sense the tension beneath the surface. Every cough from a hound or strange patch on a cat is scrutinized. A pigeon found dead in the courtyard is buried with an odd mix of reverence and relief, while the falconer quietly burns its feathers just to be sure. The priest says a special blessing over the kennels, and the cook leaves out extra milk for the cats, for luck and for the larder. By midday, the animals seem to sense their elevated status. The dogs strut through the halls, tails high, while the cats lounge in sunny spots and accept tribute from passing servants. A few of the bravest children attempt to train mice as pets, but the experiment ends in chaos when a page boy's mouse escapes during supper, prompting a second impromptu rat hunt to much laughter and a bit of chaos. Evening brings a kind of peace, the day's dramas softened by candlelight and the soft sleepy purr of cats curled on the hearth. You find yourself grateful for their company and for the peculiar rituals that make a strange time feel more bearable. As you climb into bed, you tuck your feet beneath a blanket that still smells faintly of rosemary and cat fur, and you whisper a thank you to the unsung guardians of the castle, those on 2 legs and those on 4. You wake to the commotion of new arrivals at the castle gate, a sound you haven't heard in weeks. Voices rise above the drizzle, calling for mercy, for sanctuary, for a chance to rest within thick stone walls. It's not just peasants and peddlers. Today you see a small band of travelling monks, a bedraggled merchant and his son, and even a pair of nervous-looking nobles on borrowed horses, their livery muddied, their faces drawn. The pestilence doesn't respect class. You realise everyone is seeking safe haven, and the castle is both refuge and risk. From the ramparts, the steward surveys the scene with wary eyes. Mainstream historical fact: during outbreaks, castles and fortified manors became magnets for desperate travellers. Yet admitting outsiders was a calculated risk. A single cough could doom the entire household. Protocols are strict. The drawbridge is only half lowered. Visitors are kept to distance, and messengers shout their requests across the moat. You watch the ritual unfold, a blend of hospitality and suspicion. The monks come first, holding up a wooden cross and their worn satchels. The Lord consults with the priest, who vouches for their piety and cleanliness, but orders them to be quarantined in a small outbuilding for a week. The kitchen maid delivers food to them by way of a long pole and basket. The merchant, with his battered pack, is less lucky. He must sleep in a tent just outside the outer wall, his boy wrapped in his cloak, waiting out the sickness watch, before being allowed even a bowl of porridge.
But the greatest stir comes when word spreads that two noble visitors are seeking shelter, relatives of the lady herself. Their guards, less patient than their masters, argue loudly with the castle watch. It's a scene of whispered debates, hastily written notes, and the occasional threat. The decision is finally made to let them stay, but only in the upper guest rooms, sealed, guarded, and with fresh rushes brought twice a day. No one, not even family, is above suspicion now. Fringe tidbit: there's talk among the servants that noble visitors sometimes bribed their way through quarantine with gifts, fine wine, bolts of silk, or even rare relics said to ward off plague. In the stables you see one of the nobles slip the stable master a silver ring, hoping for an extra measure of comfort for their horses. The castle's children, meanwhile, gather near the gate, hoping for stories or trinkets from the newcomers, and are promptly shooed away. You help with the day's logistics, passing supplies to the monks, collecting letters from the merchant, and escorting the new nobles to their quarters. Each interaction is fraught with awkward pauses, everyone keenly aware of the invisible threat that travels with every breath. The stable boys, normally eager for gossip, keep their distance. The cook warns the staff to clean their hands twice over after handling the strangers' bowls. Evening brings new anxieties. Rumours ripple through the castle that one of the monks was seen coughing, that the merchant's boy has a fever, that the noble lady's ring is a cursed token from the east. Historians still argue whether opening the gates to outsiders was an act of mercy or a terrible mistake. Some say the flow of news, goods, and new blood helped castles survive isolation. Others point to stories of pestilence spreading with the wheels of a single cart and decimating households that had held out for months. Yet, for all the suspicion, you witness moments of kindness, a page boy slipping a slice of bread to the merchant's son, a monk gifting a tiny wooden cross to the cook's daughter, the noble visitors reading to the children from a treasured book. Even in fear there are gestures of hope and humanity. That night you drift off to the distant sound of prayers from the monks' quarters, the tired sighs of travellers, and the shuffling of guards posted at every door. The castle, for all its caution, has become a crossroads, a place where fate, fortune, and the stubborn urge to help others continue to collide. Dawn creeps over the castle rooftops, painting the stones with a pale, washed-out gold. But there's an odd excitement in the air, a restless stirring as old customs, strange rituals, and forgotten beliefs begin to bubble up from the depths of memory. Pestilence has a way of stripping away the ordinary, and what remains can be both fascinating and unsettling. This morning you wake to the sound of singing, though it's not the gentle lull of prayers, but the wild, discordant chant of flagellants winding through the outer ward. The flagellants are a sight both sombre and absurd. Men and women clad in rough homespun, backs streaked with marks from their own whips, marching in a line as they shout hymns and strike themselves in a rhythmic display. Mainstream historical fact: across medieval Europe, groups of flagellants roamed from town to town during plague outbreaks, believing self-punishment would atone for sin and drive away disease. The castle folk crowd the ramparts to watch, some crossing themselves, others peering with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Inside, the usual order is turned upside down. The cook's apprentice claims to have seen a woman in the hall dancing barefoot at midnight, spinning in circles to confuse the pestilence.
A page boy is caught whispering charms over the castle well, and the herbalist tries to soothe tempers by handing out posies of marigold and feverfew. The Lord himself, usually staid and sceptical, orders a loaf of bread baked in the shape of a human figure. Fringe tidbit, pest cakes, shaped like little men, were sometimes baked and eaten as protective charms, with the crumbs scattered to the birds for good luck. A sense of permission settles over the castle. Customary boundaries dissolve. The servants organize a fool's parade, with borrowed masks and tattered ribbons, mocking the pestilence with laughter and outrageous costumes. Children are encouraged to leap over bundles of rushes for luck, and even the noble family joins in, wearing garlands of garlic and rosemary around their necks. The priest blesses the chaos, half indulgent, half concerned. He leads a procession around the walls, singing psalms, swinging incense, and anointing the doors with oil. In the kitchen, the head cook and the scullery maid get into a mock argument over whose recipe is better at banishing bad spirits, roast onions or garlic stew. The herbalist quietly brews a new batch of pest tea, tossing in whatever herbs are left, and telling everyone that the more ridiculous it tastes, the stronger its power. Historians still debate the wisdom and meaning of these rituals. Some say that such customs, though unscientific, gave people hope and an illusion of control, and perhaps brought them closer together in adversity. Others argue that these acts, flagellation, wild dancing, even the burning of special incense, often had little real impact, and sometimes risked spreading more trouble than they dispelled. As the day passes, the castle is filled with music and laughter, tears and prayers. Ada swept into the feverish pageantry, donning a homemade mask, tasting the oddest stew you've ever encountered, and helping the children write charms on scraps of parchment to hang above the beds. A visiting monk even suggests a round of plague ball, a strange game involving a stuffed sock and a great deal of shouting, which leaves everyone breathless and, for a moment, truly joyful. Night falls, but the revels don't immediately die away. The oldest nurse in the castle is persuaded to tell stories by the fire tales of miraculous recoveries and the mysterious power of courage and laughter. You listen, warmed by the glow of shared company, and realize that the strangest customs are often those that draw people closest together. You fall asleep with a sprig of garlic beneath your pillow, a painted mask by your side, and the lingering hope that tomorrow will dawn a little brighter. There's a hush over the castle today, a silence deeper than usual, as if every stone and rafter is holding its breath. The flagellants have passed on, the music from the feast has faded, and the air feels dense with the unspoken truth that every castle must eventually face death has visited these walls. You awaken to the solemn toll of the chapel bell, the kind of slow, heavy peal that carries through every corridor, calling all to remembrance, to mourning, and strangely, to resilience. It begins quietly with the closing of a chamber door and the hush of voices in the upper hall. The Lord's old tutor, always a fixture at the midday meal, is missing from his usual spot. The nursemaid's pallet is empty. A child's wooden toy sits abandoned at the foot of a bed. You watch as the healer, eyes shadowed and tired, moves from one quiet room to the next, offering words of comfort, a hand to squeeze, and sometimes the last rite. Mainstream historical fact: medieval castles, like the villages around them, were shaped by death as much as by life. Loss came quickly, and customs surrounding death, prayer, ritual washing, the burning of candles and incense offered structure amid chaos. A quiet procession forms. The priest leads with a low, murmured prayer, followed by family, then servants, each carrying a sprig of rosemary, a candle or a treasured possession of the deceased. The chapel, lit with every spare candle, glows gold and shadowed. The relic on the altar is newly polished, and the air is thick with incense, sharp and comforting. The household gathers, heads bowed, the lord and lady at the front, hands clasped tightly together. Even the children sense the weight of the moment, and stand quietly, eyes wide. The morning ritual is a blend of faith and folklore. The healer places coins on the eyes of the departed, a gesture meant to pay the ferryman on the journey beyond. The nursemaid scatters lavender and rosemary in the corners of the chapel, and the cook brings a loaf of bread for the spirit to carry. A cat slinks between the pews, pausing as if to pay its respects, and a brave kitchen boy slips a note of goodbye into the folded hands of his grandmother. Fringe tidbit: some believe that ringing every bell in the castle would confuse death, driving away lingering spirits. Today the bell is rung 3 times at sunrise, noon and sunset, its echo lingering in every heart. After the prayers, the castle is filled with stories, whispered memories of the ones lost. The lord recalls the tutor's patience and wisdom. The cook recounts the nursemaid's secret recipe for sweet cakes. The children giggle at memories of games played and bedtime tales told. There are tears, but also laughter, a release of the tension that's held so tight for so long. Historians still argue whether these morning rituals provided real comfort, or if they simply gave the living something to do in the face of helplessness. Some suggest that the shared acts of remembrance helped castles recover more quickly from loss, uniting households in grief and hope. Others note that, in times of widespread pestilence, so many deaths could overwhelm even the most elaborate customs, leaving households numb and hollowed out. As the day fades, the castle begins to stir again. The kitchens are filled with the smell of baking bread, a sign that life, however changed, must go on. The children are sent to tend the herb garden, and you help gather the first spring flowers for the chapel. There's a softness to every movement, a gentler tone to every word. Even in sorrow, kindness seems to multiply, a gentle touch, a shared loaf, a whispered promise to remember. You fall asleep that night with the bells echo in your ears, the scent of lavender on your pillow, and the faint comfort of knowing that, even in the darkest hours, the castle endures. Mourning is part of the fabric here, a way to keep the past close, while searching, always, for a sliver of light in the coming dawn. Morning breaks with gentle rain, the kind that patters softly on the castle's slate roofs and soothes the tense hush that's lingered for days. You wake feeling lighter, as if the walls themselves have relaxed, breathing out the sorrow of morning and welcoming in the fragile hope of renewal. Today, something has shifted. The rituals of fear, the daily routines of caution and careful rationing now give way, if only slightly, to the stirrings of ordinary life. The pestilence hasn't vanished, but the grip of dread is beginning to loosen. You start the day in the garden, pulling weeds beside the herbalist and a handful of kitchen maids. The castle children run between rows of mint and thyme, their laughter rising with the mist. The cook, cheeks flushed with rare optimism, inspects the first green shoots of peas and onions poking through the damp earth. Mainstream historical fact: even during periods of quarantine, castle gardens were tended, providing not only essential food and medicine, but also a sense of order and purpose. The act of gardening becomes almost meditative, each handful of earth a reassurance that the world continues, that the cycles of planting and harvest endure, even as everything else has changed. There's a cautious bustle as the castle folk adjust to their new normal. The guards resume their watch, but their posture is less stiff. Meals in the great hall become a bit less sombre. Laughter and conversation filter back between bites of bread and soup. Servants, their chores never ending, now pause to share a joke or sing a line of an old song. You see the noble children playing a cautious game of tag, darting behind pillars and shrieking in delight when they're caught. The Lord's daughter, who once spent hours alone, now helps the herbalist pick wild garlic for the kitchens. Even the dogs seem livelier chasing after each other in the muddy yard, oblivious to human worries. Fringe tidbit. In some castles, as soon as a household believed the worst had passed, a special loaf, sometimes braided or baked in a ring, was prepared and shared among all, symbolizing the renewal of unity and luck. Today, the cook prepares just such a loaf, perfuming the entire hall with the sweet yeasty aroma of celebration. The Lord himself breaks the bread and offers a piece to each member of the household, nobles and servants alike. It's a simple gesture, but it brings more comfort than any relic or ritual. As dusk approaches, you notice the small but vital changes that mark the first steps toward recovery. The healer visits the sick with a lighter heart, noting that more are waking with appetite and colour in their cheeks. The priest gives thanks for every empty bed in the infirmary and leads the castle in a prayer of gratitude, not just for survival, but for each other. The kitchen staff whisper plans for a May Day feast. In the quiet between chores, you hear the minstrels tuning their lutes and the youngest maids rehearsing a new dance. Historians still debate how quickly castles recovered from pestilence and whether joy and unity returned out of hope or necessity. Some say that life's return was a cautious process, with setbacks always possible. Others believe that even a small taste of celebration could rekindle hope, helping people reclaim a sense of purpose after months of hardship. As the castle prepares for night, you sit by a window, watching raindrops trickle down the glass. The air smells of fresh bread, damp earth, and spring. You realize that you've become part of Siphon Resilient, an unbroken chain of hope and memory that weaves through every hardship, every whispered prayer, every shared loaf and song. Now the hour is late and the castle is settling into peaceful stillness. The fire in the great hall burns low, casting gentle shadows along the flagstones and illuminating the quiet faces of those who have endured together. You stretch out on your straw mattress, feeling the comfort of familiar sounds, a dog's sigh, the creak of beams overhead, the soft breath of the wind at the window. Outside, the rain continues its slow, steady rhythm, as if promising new growth, new beginnings. Let your mind drift back over these long weeks, the fevered rush to shut the gates, the wary glances and whispered prayers, the moments of laughter stolen from the jaws of fear. You recall the taste of onion broth, the scratch of coarse linen, the weight of a herb pouch around your neck, and the bright, stubborn eyes of the castle's children refusing to surrender to despair. Little by little, life has returned.
You find peace in small things, the softness of a cat's fur, the tang of mint in your tea, the glow of morning through the garden window. In this world of stone and shadow, hope has been planted with every careful hand, watered by kindness, and nurtured by patience.
As sleep draws near, let yourself imagine the gates opening once more, the laughter of markets in the valley, and the joyful clamour of voices returning. The castle stands as it always has, steadfast, stubborn, ready for whatever comes next. Your eyes grow heavy. The story fades. You are safe. You are home. And a gentler dawn awaits.